Hello everyone, I am Dr. Banalata Saikia, Assistant Professor, Department of Economics, Government Model Women College, Senga. Today I am going to discuss about fiscal policy in India. As you all know, there are two macroeconomic policies to stabilize economic growth and other economic activities. One is monetary policy, which is managed by RBI to control the money supply and inflation, and another one is fiscal policy, which is also called budgetary policy. It is a government economic policy which deals with public revenue, public expenditure, borrowing and deficit financing. Fiscal policy is basically based on theories of the British economist Keynes, who theorized that any kind of government changes through taxation and spending influence the aggregate demand and other economic activities. The major goal of the fiscal policy to stimulate sustainable economic growth, reducing poverty, unemployment, inflation rate, and influence aggregate demand and price level. Objectives of fiscal policy: effective mobilization of resources, price stability and control of inflation, increasing national income, employment generation, reduction in inequalities of income and wealth, reducing the deficit in the balance of payment, and infrastructure development. Then instruments of fiscal policy. There are four instruments: public revenue, public expenditure, deficit and debt. Public taxation or revenue have two components: revenue receipt and capital receipt. Again, revenue receipt have two components: tax and non-tax revenue. And again, tax revenue have two components: direct and indirect tax. Public expenditure also have two components: revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. Again, in public deficit, there are three components: fiscal deficit, revenue deficit and primary deficit. And public debt may be in the form of internal and external debt. The definitions of the fiscal policy instruments are here. Revenue receipt means the government receives this is without creating any liabilities or asset. Capital receipt is the receipt by the government which is create liability or asset. Revenue expenditure incurred for its operational purposes like salaries, subsidies and interest payments. Capital expenditure which create assets which will provide benefits in the future. Fiscal deficit is also called total budget deficit, is the difference between the government total expenditure and total receipt excluding borrowing. Then revenue receipt is excess of revenue expenditure over revenue receipt. Primary deficit is nothing but fiscal deficit minus the interest payments. Then internal debt refers to the total debt that borrowed within the country, includes domestic banks and financial institutions. And external is the government's debt borrowed from the foreign sources like IMF, World Bank and foreign governments. So types of fiscal policy. There are two major types, that is expansionary fiscal policy and contractionary fiscal policy. Through expansionary fiscal policy, government want to expand the economy through reducing taxes and spending more to create employability, which create money supply in the economy and aggregate demand, which stimulate economic growth. And through contractionary fiscal policy, government wants to increase the taxes and reduce the spending to control the money supply, which control inflation rate. Then effects of fiscal policy. The first effect of fiscal policy is to decrease the unemployment, expansion of economic growth through subsidies and tax cuts, and discourage the public spending to control the inflation, reducing unemployment, poverty, etc. Now, the fiscal policy of the Indian government has been very successful in the field of resource mobilization, distribution and allocation of the resources, which stimulate economic growth, stable the price and demand. So, it is a successful policy for the economy. Thank you.